Shrayana Bhattacharya.
God, no.
This was many years ago, I think 2013 or so. I was a impoverished and struggling writer, which I still am. And she was also an less impoverished, I'd say. She already had her just started at the bank. But we were reading at this little pub in Horsecass village that gave authors a free meal and a free drink. So that's why we were there and we were reading. And Shrayana read one of the early bits of this book. Obviously, I was hooked. It was brilliant. The idea was brilliant. The writing was brilliant. And since then, I kept badgering her, as all her friends have, when is the book going to be out? And there it is. The book is out. It's brilliant. Many of you have read the book already. And this is going to be an event where it's between you, the students of Ashoka University, and Shrayana. My entire department is here, so I just want to do like a shout out. That's the Undergraduate Writing Programme, guys. We teach you ICT, Introduction to Critical Thinking. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Aman to introduce the department. But one little thought, why Shrayana? We teach critical thinking. And when we teach critical thinking, we tell them to think for themselves. And then we also teach them academic writing when they ask us that, should we edit the I out? Can we use I? So here is a brilliant example of how the I voice, the researcher herself, converses with the discipline, right? Okay, over to my much more articulate colleague, Aman.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. I suspect that because we're all here under the aegis of the Undergraduate Writing Programme and the PPE Society, I think you're owed an explanation as to why you were being subjected to this on a Thursday evening, as Devapriya says that you have better things to do, apparently. The Undergraduate Writing Programme at Ashoka is responsible for the ICT, the Introduction to Critical Thinking course, which purportedly teaches you guys how to write. But as you all know, that this is a program that is actually responsible for changing the way that you think about writing more than doing a lot of actual writing. That, I think, you learn a lot more from people like Shrayana, and that's why we organize events like Track Changes that allow you to coordinate and converse with people who practice writing as a craft. On top of that, the ICT as a course is dedicated to molding that perception that writing is just adhering to a sense of strictures that you get from grammar, but rather it is aimed to making you rethink what the act of writing itself is. And the act of writing is inseparable from the act of thinking. In that sense, that critical thinking word that you have appended at the end of your program has to do with what you do ultimately in your courses, which is writing. And this is among the many efforts that we lead, not only in our classroom, through the student-facing office hours programs that we run with you, to tell you that writing is more than a mere vessel for thought. And this is the first in-person event that we're having since the pandemic began. So I'm extremely grateful for all of you for gracing us with your presence today and taking out the time. And for further development, you can speak to Mukundan. As an introduction, I don't think you need to be introduced to us individually. And if you really want to know us, you can accost us outside later, right? So with that, I'd like to hand over to Mukundan so that you can learn about the other culprits who are responsible for this.
Okay, thank you for making it very easy for me to follow up. But yeah, so I'm here to introduce the PPE Society. We're a young academic society based out of Ashoka. We're a little more than a year old. And broadly, we were founded with three very related objectives, right? First is that when you're in a liberal arts environment, especially Ashoka, you're promised a certain measure of interdisciplinarity. And our objective has been to attempt to concretize this interdisciplinarity from a buzzword-like entity into a real thing that you can experience, right? And as a related notion to that, we're trying to encourage people to think across disciplines. And as a related notion to that, we try and organize conversations where you're forced to think across disciplines. And that's why we're very proud to be able to partner with two people who do that. First, the undergraduate writing program, like Professor Shreyas pointed out, and with Miss Bhattacharya also, because this book is as interdisciplinary as it gets. So that's about it. We'll get out of your way now and we'll get to the main part of the event. I will now hand over to Amia, who will introduce Miss Bhattacharya, whom you're all, I'm presuming, here for.
Shrayana Bhattacharya trained in development economics at Delhi University and Harvard University. Since 2014, in her role as an economist at a multilateral development bank, she is focused on issues related to social policy and jobs. Prior to this, she worked on research projects with the Center for Policy Research, SEWA Union, and Institute of Social Studies Trust. Her writing has appeared in the Indian Express, Economic and Political Weekly, and the Caravan. We would love if you could start with a reading before we entertain questions from the audience. I don't think so. Should I just use that? No. So can I maybe so maybe we could do like a 10-minute or a 7-minute reading and then open it up to questions, or how do you want to do this? Is there a yeah? Okay. Well, firstly, thank you so much. I have to say, it's still exotic to see people in a space. I have only been interacting with people, even in my job, and even as the book has been out. The book's been out since November 2021, largely through screens, and there's a flatness to that, which I think many of us can, would aspire to get rid of. So this is really special. Thank you. Thank you to the team for hosting me. For everyone who's here. I just want to start with a quick quiz. How many of you have actually heard of the book and have a sense of, have read bits of it, have engaged with the book in any way? Okay. So I'm not going to do the long spiel on what the book is and its origin. Maybe I'll just do a line. How many of you are Shahrukh Khan fans? It's like 50%, which is very disappointing. But hopefully by the end of this, we would have moved to 55, if not 50. I want to start before I do the reading, just giving you a sense of where this came from. Even for those who've engaged with it, maybe it's a kind of history that would be useful. And I recognize actually saying this in an academic institution may get me a few frowns, but I'll still say it. This book is very much my own complete frustration with social sciences. The way they are taught, the way academic writing works. So it's beautiful that this is a PPE meets writing program that's organizing this. I started my career working for a bunch of think tanks on different research projects. And there was a very specific language that you're all supposed to use, right? It's very linear. And I was very interested and motivated for personal reasons to look at women, labor, and gender issues in the economy. And there's a way that language operates. There's a way that theory operates, particularly in economics. You have a very rigid way you're supposed to write. And I decided, well, there was a part of me for my own livelihood. I mean, I have to support myself and family and all of that, that is actually obviously a kind of language that I will train to do. I value it, I read it, I consume it. I learn a lot from it. I cannot write like that. I think, I wrote a few academic papers and I think I nearly turned into hives by the end of it because there was a very virulent reaction. I just couldn't hold that kind of writing. And so I decided for my own sake, for my own sanity, I would create a separate space for myself where I would use research that I was quite passionate about, but write it in a way which was completely, it would subvert almost all rules. And that is this book. And the first rule I thought I would subvert is, the one thing I remember, I went to someone who's actually blurbed the book eventually, a very famous economist. And I said, well, I want to write a book about women in the economy, but I'm going to do it through the lens of Shahrukh Khan. And I remember he just looked at me and he said, are you nuts? Why would you do that? Because there is this seriousness Olympics that a certain kind of writing is supposed to adhere to. And I just wasn't interested in that status game. I said, I want to write what I want to write. Fortunately, I had a job, a steady job. So it allowed me the space for creativity. And that's essentially what this is. The book starts in 2006. I'm going to do a bit of a guided tour through the book. So I'll read different bits. And I think we even have some visual help from Mr. Shahrukh Khan himself. We have some clips that I'd like you to just see, like a minute or so, which may actually help the reading. It'll make the reading come alive because you'll know what I'm talking about. The book starts in 2006. I followed a set of women from 2006 till around 2019. Um, it was a complete accident. I was working for a project with SEWA. I'm sure many of us know this is the Self-Employed Women's Association, one of the largest organizations of women workers. And I was sent with a very typical survey questionnaire to collect information on wages and working conditions. And I showed up. This was in a neighborhood called Bapu Nagar, which is a low-income settlement. In fact, it was struck by the riots. It is one of the areas which has actually seen a lot of violence. And I was sent there to collect data on women who were making agarbattis and garments at home, earning about a quarter of minimum wage. And when I started doing the survey, many of these women were unionizing, they were fighting for their own rights, they were extremely aware of their economic deprivations. And I realized very quickly into almost the first 4 minutes of the standard survey questionnaire process. How many people here have actually done a survey question, ever administered it to someone? Okay, so maybe I think this is something you'll all connect with. Into the first 4 minutes, I could just see glazed eyes, very bored. I can see the lady there like shaking her head very rigorously. She's like, I've been there. Totally bored, not interested. And finally, when I started to ask these women, well, what's going on? Well, they said, well, number one, we've answered these questions multiple times before. We've run our own surveys to make representations to government labor departments, and not much has happened. And they were very jaded with that whole process. And so I decided, well, we're going to take a break because this is not working. And we started talking about the few things that really did connect a lot of us, and Bollywood, unsurprisingly, is one. And I started asking all these women about their favorite actor. And lo and behold, everywhere I went, from this neighborhood in Ahmedabad, I did research projects in Jharkhand, moved to Uttar Pradesh. I met Shahrukh fans everywhere. Not every woman was a Shahrukh fan, but I met them. And I realized when I started to listen very closely and carefully to what these women were saying, none of us was actually ever talking about him. We were talking about ourselves. Because any conversation, and I think for those of you who've engaged with the book will have a sense of what I mean, they're not talking about him, they're talking about the fact that they can't find purchasing power to watch him, that they can't find public spaces or safe spaces to watch him, that it's very difficult for women across class backgrounds actually to access markets, media, safe spaces, to just partake in the simplest transaction of wanting to just watch an actor. And I decided to follow this story because I thought it was a very powerful illustration of how compromised women's economic freedoms are in our country, that even the easiest, just getting a phone and watching him, and right now I know we're going to put up an image of Shahrukh, it's so easy for all of us. Most women in our country suffer to just be able to claim their pleasure. And as I started to follow these stories, the other aspect that really came alive was they weren't just talking about then money, markets, media. Immediately it became a conversation about masculinity, about how, everywhere I went, there was this common refrain, men are like Salman, but we want Shahrukh. And it's I mean, I think the applause is so. So are people applauding because they're applauding Salman, or are they applauding the lament? Anyway, but we'll discuss that later. And I was very intrigued because, again, my colleagues who were mentors, academics, colleagues I used to work with in the sort of development space, didn't really think any of this was interesting. I mean, like, so what? So they're complaining about a man, they're moaning. But I love to hear people moan and complain. It's like the thing that I like really makes me come alive. And so I thought, well, I'm curious about why is it that these women are complaining? Like, what's going on? And slowly and steadily, in a very complex way, and I'd encourage those to just look at the book to understand what I mean, and I'll read a bit of it to illustrate. You realize that this became a very interesting conversation around romantic choice, around the hidden taxes. Maybe many of you are studying economics. I hope you will read about hidden taxes that women have to suffer and bear. it became a conversation about intra-household bargaining theory. How many people here have heard of intra-household bargaining theory in microeconomics yet? Okay. It's a very, I mean, I think as people, for those who are interested in development economics, it's a kind of theory within, it's a family of work within development economics, which actually this book really owes its sort of theoretical spine to. Because what it does is it actually argues that even if household incomes grow, how household incomes are distributed within the home, how food is distributed within the home requires very complex bargains within the household. And I'm giving you this one illustration of Shahrukh Khan to show you, well, once women start earning money, are they able to bargain within the household to actually just seek leisure goods, right? It's a very simple thing, but you realize it's actually tremendously complicated. Um, I had never thought the book would end in 2019. That's another thing I wanted to share with all of you. I thought it would be a fairly academic feminist text, which would end in 2011. And I would only write about women who were from the precariat. So these women I met through research projects right up in 2006. But in 2012-13, I was facing something in my own personal life, which I've written about very transparently. I had my heart smashed. And for some reason at that point, this idea of writing something very academic or even consuming something very academic just felt boring to me. And I thought, this is not working. And I decided then to go back to scratch and rewrite it. So it became a lot more personal, a lot more conversational. I wanted it to be much more accessible. I really wanted, in fact, I really wanted Shahrukh Khan to be able to read this book and basically say, well, this is what's going on in economic theory to women in the economy. I wanted it to be really accessible. It was a political project for me that I wanted it just to be very easy for people to consume. And I also decided at that point that I wanted to open up the conversation. So it would no longer be about like my elite Brahmin self talking to women who were obviously far more disadvantaged than me, but that I would bring in my class, my caste group, just make it a cross-class analysis. So I solicited more interviews. And I think one of the things that happened with that, of course, there was more labor for me because as with anyone who does qualitative research knows, there's permission, there are ethical norms, there's a lot that goes in. So unsurprisingly, 2011 then became 2019. And the book is what it is. It is an ode to slow social science. It is an ode to slow literature, which I would highly recommend all of you think about. I think we all live in a world where we're thinking our creative projects will finish very quickly. But sometimes some things will take time, and we can talk about just what that means later. Maybe what I will do right to start as a guided tour of the book is I want to start by reading just a little bit of the structure of the book. I know that some of you have read it, others haven't. This is the preface of the book. And I'm going to rely on maybe Mukundan to make sure that I finish these readings in 10 minutes so that we're able to actually interact. Yeah, great. In my darkest teary-eyed moments, and there have been countless, and in this my is me, it's me. Since Mukundan was talking about writing is the I, so I am the I. There he is, this hazy image, there is Shahrukh, arms wide open, promising the ultimate refuge in love and conjugality, yet mocking the sham of my filmy fantasies and expectations. His image serves as a constant reminder of how far I've traveled, chronically dissatisfied with the men I keep trying to be worthy of. I am tired, I am disappointed, and I am desperate. But as I have learned over the past decade, I am also not alone. From the drawing rooms of Jorbagh to the forests of Jharkhand, across diverse classes and communities, Shahrukh Khan appears as recourse in many teary-eyed moments triggered by the drudgery and ignominy of being a woman in modern India. While visions of Shahrukh might serve as mere escapism in the plush homes of Lodi Road, indulging in fandom becomes a form of assertion, even protest amongst poor and working class women. The ability to watch films and buy iconography independent of the family is a freedom bestowed by employment. Espousing the virtues of Shahrukh marks a woman's enthusiasm for expressing desire than becoming desirable. Daydreams, posters, and cinema tickets signal hidden peeves and protestations, saddle between expectations, exhaustion, desperation, and dissatisfaction, constantly yearning to be free, I am joined by the lonely working women of India. Through 15 years of my professional life, talking to women across the country, I pieced together a fan club that turns to Shahrukh in times of turbulence and heartache. None of the club's members know one another. They'll never meet. The club only exists in my head. However, each member curled up with Khan's tweets and films during the COVID-19 crisis. In seeking out Shahrukh, they're not seeking entertainment alone. Sure, they're looking to have fun, but they're also looking for new scripts and metaphors, new ways of relating to men, money, and marriage. This book isn't about Shah Rukh Khan, although everyone in the media seems to insist it is. It really isn't. Rather, I hope to reveal how female fans use his icon to talk about themselves. Their stories will illustrate how his songs, films, and interviews are invoked to frame a feminine conversation on inequality within families, workplaces, and contemporary romances. Life can often be described as the distance we travel between the people we are and the people we want to be. In one of Shah Rukh's greatest films, Swades, his character returns from the United States to India to reconnect with his roots. As he drives to a remote village to find his childhood nanny, he offers the sage a lift. Together, they sing a song composed by A.R. Rahman and written by Javed Akhtar. The song says, "Just keep traveling, life is a vehicle, and time is the wheel. यूं ही चला चल रही, जीवन गाड़ी है समय पहिया." My primary interest is to shed light on the trajectories of a few Indian women as they travel from the 1990s into the 2020s with a film star for companionship. These journeys are as far from feminist principles as Shah Rukh's films are. Their politics may not live up to progressive ideals, but the messy beliefs on display serve as important guides to understand the lived experiences of Indian women without active Twitter handles, those considered too ordinary to find mention in the news. I present each woman's journey based on her location in the Indian wealth distribution. Part one of this book introduces the actor and the fantasies he inspires in elite women. The stories touch upon the lives of fans like myself, Vidya, a Brahmin engineer, a Rajput philosopher, and composites of various upper class women I interviewed. Part two presents the accountant, an ambitious government clerk, and Gold, a lonely, sleepless flight attendant, both of whom are the first women in their conservative business caste families to hold paid jobs outside the home. Part three follows women from India's low-income precariat, Zahira, a community organizer and informal worker in the slums of Ahmedabad, Manju, a garment worker bored stiff by her life in semi-rural Western Uttar Pradesh, Sandhya, a Bengali part-time cook and house cleaner, and Lily, a tribal Christian domestic worker who migrates between rural Jharkhand and the posh Delhi neighborhood of Jorbagh. Part four starts with a debrief with various scholars and activists. I conclude by talking with fans, a syncretic mix from different faiths, classes, and countries who have lined up outside Shah Rukh's mansion in Mumbai, hoping to catch a glimpse of their favorite actor. The chapters that follow chronicle a paradoxical fan club full of hopeless romantics born in the 1980s. Is there anyone in this room born in the 1980s other than the faculty here? No. Anyway, so generation before. Fantasizing about an impossibly idealized kind of love they'd seen an actor perform on screen. Yet, all their real world efforts were extremely pragmatic, often sacrificing the love they fantasized about as a price for earning status, security, and financial freedom. These women relied on Shah Rukh when they found the real world and all its pandemics and practicalities inhospitable, because only the deepest dissatisfaction with reality drives us to dwell in fantasy. So, what does this club look like? What fantasies are these women? What realities are these women running away from? Where do these fantasies take them? From economic liberalization to an economic lockdown, what did their days and daydreams amount to? So that's the preface. Can I ask you maybe to play a quick clip? Yeah. Yes, the Rajiv Shukla. So how many people here know Rajiv Shukla? He's a politician. Okay. Does someone here want to tell us who Rajiv Shukla is? I can do it. He's a politician now, very closely involved with the cricket administration of the country. He did an interview with Shah Rukh, and I'd like you to see just a minute because what I'll do is, as I mentioned, different parts of the book are mapping different class backgrounds. And I'm going to start with women like me. And there's a chapter here called The Elite Composite. And I'm going to read a short section which references something that's going on in this conversation. And it's just a minute for us to watch. I think it's from 1638 or something. Yeah. Yeah. And, I want to now read a short bit. So what I did for the interviews with women of my own class is I solicited interviews, but I realized that all these women, some wanted to be identified, others didn't want to be identified. So I basically constructed a median Shah Rukh fan who is elite. And I wrote about this elite composite. So it's almost like I'm writing a median. If you were to just write up a median, how would you do it? And I want to read just a short bit from that for you. And it's written in the person where it's addressed to the composite herself. What a contrast Shah Rukh is to the men your teenage self will encounter on the streets out in the world. Slowly, you recognize how the creep following you from the bus stop or crank calling your number seems to mimic the stalker your hero played in his early films. You grow angry at Shah Rukh. You start policing yourself. You walk in groups. You believe you need protection from the world at large. You occupy public space with an attitude of sustained vigilance. You shrink. You watch Shah Rukh in his interviews and love stories, wondering why the men harassing you cannot learn more from the loving parts of his icon. Soon, you compartmentalize. You despise Shah Rukh as the stalker. Instead, you choose to see the best in your hero. He reciprocates your good faith in him, ceasing to portray the obvious creep. Your adolescent belief in marital fidelity will mirror the national media's adolescent interest in Shah Rukh's monogamous monkhood. You read, captivated, the Filmfare articles that laud Shah Rukh's prowess at being a faithful husband. You shock of your parents, all this feeds into television interviews intended for the whole family over dinner. You remember those scandalous evenings very well. There you were with your prudish family, dal sabzi, and sex. Three interviews are always cited. First, an interaction in 1996 on India's buttoned-up public broadcasting network, Doordarshan, with journalist Rajiv Shukla. Everyone says they love their wife, Shukla says to Shah Rukh. But in the film business, every day we hear of some affair between some actor and some actress. How come there's no such news about you? Shah Rukh jokes about hiding his affairs in the same place he hides his tax returns. He then says winningly, I am happily married. I love my wife immensely. I love all the actresses I work with. They are my friends. And in the kind of society we live in these days, it isn't necessary that you have to romance the girl you work with. A second discussion around the same time of Shah Rukh's fidelity takes place on Star Plus, one of India's first private TV channels, with journalist Tableen Singh on her weekly show Ek Din Ek Jeevan. She follows Shah Rukh through the working day as he shoots for the film Duplicate. Singh suggests in a voiceover that most well-known Indian actors tend to become romantically involved with multiple actresses, as if an extramarital affair is a status symbol for a married man in the film industry. She goes on to describe Shah Rukh as unusual and not spoiled by his fame, since he's yet to be sullied by scandal. She asks him about his fidelity on a national television show in a country as conservative as India. You giggle and remember how bored he looked. Khan has grown accustomed to being the poster boy for marital monogamy. He grins and replies, arms outstretched and hands interlocked. I think I'm gay. Everybody keeps asking me this and saying this. Why isn't your name linked to some actress or the other? But they're friends. I participate in their happiness and sadness. And I was always under the impression that the heroines I work with, that I'm supposed to work with them. I'm not supposed to make love to them. So I decided that I'll work with them. Decades later, when the writer of this book will interview you in your 30s, you'll express cynicism about all that eulogizing of monogamous marriage. Instead, you'll admire how Shah Rukh treated women as colleagues and comrades, that he traveled from interview to interview, reminding us that women in the workplace were professionals, not sexual objects for male pleasure and conquest. Another televised interview with Simi Garewal in the 1997 film shortly after the birth of his first son will further burnish Shah Rukh's image as a devoted husband and evolved man. Not only does he announce, I think I have a lot of woman in me, the man talks about idolizing womanhood. When asked about his wife, Shahrukh's face will light up. I am an actor, he says, because I don't like being Shahrukh. She's gory because she loves being gory. She brings such a sense of calm and peace to my life, and I don't want to do anything to destroy her peace with herself. And so Shahrukh, the star, will persuade your adolescent self into believing being a man's wife means being something truly special. A husband will value and honor your inner integrity. He will co-sponsor your emotional well-being. You'll review his films, you'll hear him talk on TV, and you will believe that an ideal man is destined for every woman, that true love is instinctive, and that will always end in marriage, that every woman can find her happily ever after on a railway platform. Love will become supreme, the ultimate acclamation for a woman. This belief in love becomes a certainty, as sure as the result of arithmetic calculations. As one girl said to me, I walked out of his romance films and just knew that there was this kind of love in the world. Like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. If you met a man like this, you would melt and fall in love. It was the easiest concept to accept. Just to, thank you, just to portray that. I think I want to do one last clip and then we'll go. Can we do the song? What we'll do is we'll switch to the precariat now. So we've done sort of the elite composite. I wanted to actually tell you about a woman who I met, the first woman I met in Ahmedabad who I was telling you about. And this is actually her favorite song of Shahrukh's. And there's an important story there about her and her daughter, which I'll just read out quickly, but maybe we can just see the song for just a minute. Seen this song before? Okay, good, I'm glad. Okay. I'm going to read out, actually, there's a section in the book about Zahira. That's the name of the first woman I met, first Shahrukh fan back in 2006. The section is actually called It's Time to Love, Pyar Kar, after her favorite song. And I just want to demonstrate a little bit about what's happening intergenerationally between her and her daughter. And the song plays, it's almost like language. It gives language for us to talk about what's happening. So we'll just close with this. When I returned, they used to live in an area within Bapu Nagar. It's called Agarbatti Colony. Surprise, surprise, that's where actually a lot of the home-based making of incense sticks happens. When I returned to Agarbatti Colony and its adjacent localities in 2014, the area was far more built up and concretized. Middle-class residential complexes were being planned. Discussions of evictions and construction dominated the landscape. Zahira was 35 and obsessed with Meenal's marital prospects. Meenal is Zahira's daughter. These younger girls have gone mad, she told me. They're looking for love and heroes in real life. How can I explain this to her? There is no such man in real life. Her friends are all the same. They all want jobs outside Ahmedabad because they want to meet men on their own. The only good thing the 90s brought were television, cassettes, and Shahrukh Khan, but he has caused all this silliness. And now he can only help his wife and his daughter. What can he do for us? He certainly won't find a boy for Meenal. Laughter erupted. Her daughter, now 18, was standing near me as this conversation transpired. She rolled her eyes and sang a line from Zahira's favorite Shahrukh song from Dil To Pagal Hai. Pyar kar, ohu ami, pyar kar. Superseding all the songs in the list from the previous section, Zahira's all-time favorite was a tune titled Pyar Kar from the successful love triangle Dil To Pagal Hai. I won't go into the film. The film soundtrack was a huge success. Though the film is now 2 decades old, its songs have clocked more than 300 million views on YouTube. Zahira had memorized the song scene by scene, line by line. She recalled how the neon blue moonlight shines on Shahrukh's face as he suggests that everyone falls in love. His character in Dil To Pagal Hai, inevitably named Rahul, is a love-addled theater director and musician. The song is his public paean to romantic love, sung at a Valentine's Day party in Mumbai. There is not a single sari or salwar kameez in sight. I don't know if any of you noticed that. Beautiful bodies are draped in cocktail dresses and everyone is paired up, except for Shahrukh and his sexy best friend, played by Karisma Kapoor. Heart-shaped balloons fill the screen. Everyone is looking for a soulmate. Everyone is merry in their search. But Rahul feels a metaphysical tug. Someone calls out to him. Shahrukh winks at the camera and offers his standard goofy, sexy grin. He, the ultimate matinee idol, sings, "It's time to fall in love." Zahira told me about the time her group of garment and agarbatti workers watched Dil To Pagal Hai together on television. Nafisa Ben knew it was playing and helped organize the screening, she told me. They shared money to hire a generator so that a power cut couldn't interrupt the screening. A few months later, some of the women watched DDLJ and Kuch Kuch Hota Hai together at Nafisa's house. She laughed and said, I don't have parents in law, but other women, their in laws and men thought we'd gone mad. People would usually hire generators for weddings and festivities only. One of our sisters was not allowed to join us. Her mother in law forbid it. But she made an excuse, saying we had an extra order from the Seth, that's the employer, and she needed to work late. Her husband knew she was lying, but he's a good man. Why would he stop his wife from just having some fun? As devoted as Zahira was to fun, Shahrukh and these songs, she took the world they depicted and the romantic love they sold with a pinch of salt. It was, she knew, a make believe world, as out of reach for her as the opulent lifestyles on display. In commenting on how films sell fantasy in India, scholars often draw links between the income poverty of our country and the on screen displays of hyperconsumption and excessive wealth. These are meant to project the neoliberal aspirations of growing middle classes and its desire at once to uphold community tradition and encourage individualism. All these movies and are songs, and songs are dreams, Zahira would say. For her, films were simply an act of sublimation. Men were frustrated in the world, so they watched movies where men beat each other up. Women wanted to love and lead a happy family life, so they indulged in romantic songs and love stories. Meenal was Zahira's only child. They had forged a formidable bond, having braved repeated crises together. At the young age of 7, Meenal started helping her 24-year-old mother with the housework and the incense business. Meenal helped Zahira with her SEWA union duties too, sitting in on many meetings and accompanying her as much as possible. She idealized her mother. She sang all the Shahrukh songs, watched his films on TV with Zahira and her fellow worker fangirls. Meenal's fandom was her inheritance. Both women were physically alike, and Meenal wore her mother's clothes, sprucing them up together at the local tailor shop. Meenal and her mother had watched Dil To Pagal Hai thrice by 2014, each time on TV. Meenal loved the film more as she grew older. The last scene in the film shows Shahrukh holding Madhuri Dixit. The couple are wearing white and are in focus when the following set of lines in English pops up. Someone somewhere is made for you. Zahira had not read those lines. She did not read English, but Meenal could. Zahira understood on-screen romance as a beautiful falsehood. But for Meenal, love was not an impossible aspiration. It was a full-time calling. She watched all those Shahrukh films and walked away a convert. Meenal championed a certain kind of romantic totalitarianism. She believed in the all-encompassing hegemony of love. Everyone must marry someone they like, she would protest when we talked about her mother's frantic attempts at marrying her off.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for that reading. So we have a mix of a small student panel as well as obviously a very enthusiastic audience. So we're going to go back and forth for questions. So I'm at first going to introduce Neeraja, who I believe has a question about your use of the I voice and the personal anecdotes you've incorporated.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. It's so cool that you're here. So, I think my favorite part of the book was your incorporation of personal anecdotes and the fact that you incorporated both professional and romantic successes and failures so well. So, I was wondering if it was daunting to sort of tackle this intersection between a sphere that's so intimate and emotional, along with a sphere that's so academic, because I'm sure there was a fear of being perceived as not academic enough because you're also talking a lot about yourself and your life. So I was just wondering how you tackled that fear.
Devansh, since I believe you had a question on a similar line, I'm going to ask you to.
Yeah, so my question's partially been answered when you talked about how you wanted to write the book, but you straddle the line between literary elegance and academic rigor so brilliantly in the book that isn't common in non-fiction books. So you already said that you wanted to write this way, but did it come naturally to you, or was it a constant effort to maintain such a perfect balance in throughout the book?
How many people here maintain journals or write just for themselves? Yeah. So this form of writing actually just is a derivative almost of the journal. I used to journal. I'm a very active. I write every day, even things that don't make any sense. And I decided in 2013, very influenced by a few writers, particularly, I mean, she's sort of my hero. There's a writer called Vivian Gornick. I don't know if people have heard of her. I highly encourage, particularly women, to go out and read her writing. Um, and I think what it did for me was I realized that I couldn't. So the first thing was I realized very quickly in 2013 that I couldn't tell a story about women in the economy without tackling the intimate life and love. Because one thing you learn when you read the book is that actually love is a language that's used to regulate women's labor. Love is the language that forces women to completely be focused on domestic labor, which can be unrewarded and unrecognized. Love is a language that's used to withdraw women from the paid workforce. Love is labor. Love is significant labor, and feminists know this. Feminist economists have talked about it, but I realize in sort of more traditional development economics, it's not discussed as much. And so I think the reason for me to fuse the personal with the academic, or personal and the economic perhaps, is that I could not tell a story which was actually a powerful story and a complete story of the economy without love. And then when you write about love, you can't distance yourself from it, because I thought it was very dishonest to do that. I had lots of doubts. Shaugat Dasgupta, who's the editor of this book, made sure that I was very disciplined, that I wrote it in a way where it wasn't about me, because, you know, you enter that world of there's a phrase called vulnerability porn, right? Like you're sharing so much of yourself, and then it's never, because the book is about other people. It's not about me. I want the reader to know me, but I'm not the story. The story is, yes, it's a travelogue, but the story is about other people. And I think he kept me very disciplined. Anything that felt a bit waffly, he would just cut. And I think the other thing that he really helped me do is he published an excerpt actually from the piece, which is called The Aristocrats. I had heard at a point of time it had done the rounds in Ashoka when it had come out in 2016-17. And it was very popular. Like Shashi Tharoor, I think, tweeted it out. And as a consequence, I think so many people had read it. And it was powerful for confidence, because I realized I was writing in a very unusual way, and I knew it would be open to judgment and open to all kinds of things. But when I noticed the reaction to it, that was very helpful. But honestly, it wasn't even like a tactical choice. It was the only way to write. I don't think you can write a feminist text without yourself being in it. That's number one. I don't think you can write a Marxist text without you being in it. I don't think you can write a text about the economy without you being in it. And in our caste-based society, you can't write about others without you being in it. I just find that utterly, and I started by saying I was irritated with the way social science teaches people to write. Part of it was that I'd read so many of these papers and texts, and I think, well, where are you in this? I mean, I won't name people, but I used to read this and I'd be like, what's up? What's going on? Where are you? And I thought, well, this was a book for me to just be present, but the book is not about me. And I think that takes discipline. And I've redrafted 7 times. So as I said, this is a ode to slow literature.
Okay, so just to avoid any claims of nepotism, we are also going to open it up to the audience. So any audience questions? Yeah, I think that hand in the back went up first. Okay, so it'll be very difficult to recognize. I think we'll do. Can you come here by the time they ask their questions? Right.
Can I go ahead? Yeah. So I had a question regarding the process of researching, and I was very curious on how you ended up meeting these people. What was the process through which you reached out to them, got them to speak to you, and share these very intimate spaces, intimate aspects of their lives regarding this? Aishwarya.
So I mean, you point out at various occasions in the book that Shahrukh is a very self-reflective individual, and I mean, you do talk about, I mean, how he talks about like himself in a certain way in interviews right at the end. Fair enough. Uh, okay, so I mean, when I was reading the book, I was like really wondering how Shahrukh would have taken the book. So have you heard anything about how Shahrukh? Yeah, it's Ritupar.
Hi, it's lovely to meet you. The book was such a welcome respite from academic readings and all this and that. But I was very curious about this, and this seems to be something that you're very conscious of when you were writing. The Shah Rukh phenomenon is often fairly intensely tied up with heterosexuality and cishetness. The thing is, how then does the text and your research, which is really expansive, by the way, intersect with and converse with queerness? Especially since queerness itself significantly expresses itself through fandom and pop culture iconography, and the romantic choices and hidden tags and deep dissatisfaction with reality are also realities of queerness. That was something I was curious about.
I'm going to take the Shahrukh question last at the very end because it's a funny story, and I'm going to Bombay tomorrow at 6 a.m. Wow, I think my trip to Bombay has this. Is it this? Okay. I want to club actually Aishwarya and Gitanjali's question because in a way I think they're actually related. The book is happened by accident. I had never thought that I was doing research, to be perfectly honest. I thought I was fangirling. And I thought I was fangirling with people who I thought I would never fangirl with. And I would never get the opportunity to fangirl with again because I was so curious about how these women saw him and what did that mean about the way I saw him. And sometime in 2008 or 9, I was working for a feminist think tank and I was working with people like Urvashi Butalia and Naila Kabir. They suddenly told me when they were looking at some of the notes I had kept that, well, this is actually research. This is not just, the musings of just fandom, but there's something else going on here. And I started to then be a lot more diligent. I had two principles. I would never ask people direct questions about anything. I would only call them when Shahrukh had a release, when we wanted to chat. And as you can see in the book, it's not surprising. This can happen to anyone. It doesn't have to be Shahrukh Khan. If I talk to you about a piece of music you really like, a sport that you really enjoy, if I start talking to you about it, if I lean into what gives you joy, you will then open up about not just joy, but where you were in your life. How did you find the money and the transactional space in the economy to actually partake in that pleasure, right? And that occurred to me slowly. So then I think I became much more purposive with it in 2013. What was the most difficult bit of the research was seeking permissions. And because many of the women I met from the precariat, I met through existing research projects which have their own ethical codes of conduct. So I'm really grateful. And the acknowledgements have like 19 people's or maybe more people's names because they all made sure that, the applications went through, it was cleared. Anyone who's done qualitative work will know it can be quite onerous. But I'm very grateful that I had professors who helped me with that. And I only met women largely through research projects. So that made it a bit easier because there was a formal process. Amongst elite women, it was impossible. And so I did this cop out. Although it's worked out very nicely because now, I love Juno Diaz and I know he's been canceled, but I love his writing. He writes in a certain voice. And I basically, I use that to write the median, this, the first voice and referring to the person in a certain tense and voice. The final piece I will say is I had to go to my ex-boyfriend, which was quite fun. And I had to sort of tell him, well, I'm writing this. And so there was a lot. In fact, I think in the research process, the conversation was never difficult because I was never asking people directly anything. And I'd encourage all of you to think about this as you're thinking about research projects that you want to think about. I think as social scientists, we do a huge disservice to other people, especially those who don't have our privileges of education, that we almost want them to conform to a very rigid framework of our questions, right? And one thing I decided with this was that I was not going to do that. The only framework I would have is I had Shahrukh Khan. And then that led to all these other things, which I then pulled together. But the toughest part was the permission seeking, not even for women through the research projects, but in my own life. And making sure everyone was comfortable and okay and making edits according to that. Now that ties to Gitanjali's question, which is that, at the end of this book, I describe a disease I suspect all of us suffer. It's called Lavaria, from that great Shahrukh song. And I think we all have inherited this belief that we are only lovable when we conform to certain conditionalities that, capitalist societies, our families, productivity, all these norms impose on us. For women, it's worse. Anthropologists call it the patriarchal bargain. You're always bargaining. You're always doing, well, if you have this baseline, you'll be loved. If you behave a certain way, if you're ritualistic, you'll be loved. If you don't work outside the home, you'll be loved. And this is a disease. It's a hustle culture. You're always hustling. And I think heteronormativity, and the first line in the book is, my life is heteronormative hell. Heteronormativity is part of that game. And I think at the end of the book, I actually almost say that fandom, much like what you're saying, Gitanjali, fandom is an escape from that game, because all these women love Shahrukh. Shahrukh will never do anything for any of them. They will never meet him. It is a complete opting out. It's like unambiguously loving someone and knowing you'll never, does nothing, right? Now, where does that comment on queerness? I think a couple of spaces. One is, I think all of us, and through the book, I'm asking everyone who's reading it, particularly of our privileges, to really ask yourself very carefully, where are your desires constructed from? So that bit that I read about fidelity and infidelity, so much I realized of my generation's notions of fidelity, monogamy, heteronormativity come from his movies. So much of it is inherited, that language, the interviews, the way he was speaking, the way he would be with his wife. Such a dominant way, because especially for a lot of people who don't have access to anything other than popular cinema, they may not be reading feminist texts. For them, this is the dominant model. And I think to take a critical thought about your desires is also perhaps opting out of Lavaria. And I think queerness may be also an opt-out, but it has its own game. I really hope someone writes the sort of, I say this very clearly, that I think the women in my book are trapped by heterosexuality. I hope someone writes a book about those who aren't, looking at fandom from that lens, but that's not going to be me, because someone has to embody that experience through it, and I haven't. I'll tell the Shahrukh story last.
Because we're also accountable. Okay, fine. So I'm going to throw it there from our panel. And then I'm sorry, I believe we had an audience member who raised their hand earlier on. I'm so sorry.
So my question had something to do with an article you wrote for the Indian Express about DDLJ. So you defended the ending of DDLJ. A lot of people considered to sort of encourage patriarchal norms, and you sort of defended it from an opposing lens. And I have here a quote of how you used to defend it. So this is how it goes. This is because many of us actually seek love and emotional support from our families in addition to freedom and choice. This is the way we exist and express disagreement in everyday ordinary lives. Compromise can't always be seen as cowardice. So this particular paragraph resonated with me very, very deeply. So I wanted to ask you, how do you distinguish between what is considered compromise and what is considered cowardice? Where do you draw the line?
Hi, thank you for reading out sections from your book. I honestly haven't read or heard of anything like this. And while you were reading out about um, someone who said that love is not an impossibility for me, to say that I've always thought of fantasies and utopias as very different things, and somewhere there was a convergence between the two. And I wanted to ask that, coming from development economics, which is a somewhat, at least how I think of it, a slightly rigid discipline. How do you make space for such utopias in your writing as an exercise?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rishita. Thank you so much for your book. I read it like in 2 days. I just couldn't keep it down. So near the end of the book, you talk about how you dislike the entire brand of feminism that you see on Twitter Spaces, the smash, the patriarchy bit, and you know how it's much more gradual and it's chipping away, social structures more slowly. And I wanted to understand how would you recommend like people like me, women like us, from really elite spaces to not fall into such a trap? And also because like then we all have like this very rigid sort of definition of feminism that's again very privileged. And also sometimes there's a lot of conversation where there are interactions where we judge other, not judge, but for not being radical enough in our feminism. So that's my question. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, I'll start with okay. There's the utopia question, there's question about compromise, and then there's your question about okay. So there actually one thing I want to start with. I had all kinds of scripts about different films. I used to see Shahrukh a certain way. So everybody knows DDLJ's ending is toxic, right? Toxic. Everyone says that. And I was privileged in my life to know a young woman who calls herself Manju in the book, and it's quite powerful why she chooses to call herself Manju. I'd encourage all of you to read it. She's a young Muslim woman who makes embroidery at home in a village in UP. And she said, well, I don't see it as like that at all. In fact, she says that if they ran away together and if they had a fight or there was violence, which she felt was inevitable in all relationships, love will die out, and then there will be quarreling, there will be something. At that point, she said, well, where will the girl go? So her argument was that actually she felt in the end, I don't know if all of you know the ending that I'm talking about, where basically he says, I want your father's blessings, as opposed to saying, we're just going to run away. She thought that was actually very courageous of Raj. And I was stunned because I did not think that at all. I thought that it was exactly what, I think so many of us believe is that, well, why don't you run away? But she's actually, again, going back to intra-household bargaining, if there's no exit option, if the exit option for women is so terrible, I'm extremely privileged. I can tell you, trying to find a house for myself as a single woman in Nizamuddin has been a nightmare. And this is like the nicest neighborhood, but it is a nightmare. So if it's tough for me, what she's saying to me is if in that marriage there is violence and the girl needs to go back and find another home to support her, the state is not going to support her. Law and order forces are not going to support her. The market is not going to support her. Only the family comes in. And so to her, she saw that scene very differently. And I'm so glad because she made me update my beliefs about how to read that scene. Now, on that line between cowardice and compromise, I think that the higher up the echelon you go, where we have what I call the privilege of certainties, right? We know that we will be taken care of. There, I think it's only cowardice. Where there is no privilege of certainty, that's where you are in the gray world of compromise. And I think for each one, it's very different, depending on how propertied you are, how networked you are, what your income echelon is, all of those questions. So for me, it's not a fine line. So I'm going to be a good economist and say it's a constant trade-off, right? Between where you are and what are these different constraints that you're operating within. I think the question on utopia, actually, I mean, I'm going to say something. Economics is nothing but utopia. I mean, how many people here love the language of economics? I love the language of economics. I think there's one person who raised his hand, which is terrible. I need to chat with people in the econ department here. But actually, in fact, to the point that economics is a language of completely blind utopia. I mean, you assume this and you do that, and you like everything is sort of, and in fact, to me, there is a deep, that I'm going to now hesitate, but say this, I think there's actually a deep romance in the way economists think about the world. I mean, it's really with like rose-tinted glasses of incentives, rationality, all of that, right? Like it's total utopia. And so to me, in fact, to answer your question, between economics and writing about utopias, people's fantasies, it was very easy because that's exactly what economists are trained to do. We're always fantasizing. Um, but on a more serious note, there's a quote here by one of my favorite French anthropologists, and he says it's in utopias where you discover discrimination. I'm sort of paraphrasing. And he says it's in utopia where you start to reconsider why is it that our religion, government, society is like this? Why can't we have this utopia? And often now when I see Shahrukh's, wide open arms and these silly song sequences, to me, I'll never take them unseriously because I realize actually for a lot of women in the book, that was the first step to fight patriarchal norms, because they started to look at this man and they thought, well, why aren't the men in our lives this loving and this supportive? They're not asking for some superstar who's like as sexy as him, but they're saying, well, why can't they just smile or be comfortable or hold space for us? And now anytime anyone says to me that these films are silly, I get really livid, because actually it is someone's utopia. And I think we should take it, we owe it to people to take it seriously. So I think that's your answer. I think on the question of what, I have no advice to give anyone. I'm not in the business of advice. What I would say though is, I'm going to quote Amiya Srinivasan, whose book Right to Sex, I think everyone should also read. She has this beautiful line where she basically says, anytime you judge or you're jealous, it's probably something about your own desire that's speaking to you and you're not listening to it. So one thing I've done through the book, particularly there's a character here called the Rajput philosopher. If I saw her in general, I would just judge her for being some South Delhi princess. Fortunate, and thanks to that, I've just lost all space for judgment. The other thing I would say is, I think everyone comes at fighting the patriarchy in their own way. For someone, it could just be as simple as paying tax. For someone, it could be as simple as having a house. For someone, it is out and out activism. It's very different. It's very different. And I think as long as we respect each other's ways of engaging and we are honest with each other in respectful ways, I think that is the only way. And it sounds really banal. I have nothing radical to offer. But I think respect, and there has to be respect in our resistance. And a piece of advice I heard from a woman who's my mentor, she said, never ask questions of other people that you would never be willing to answer for yourself. And so anytime we do this, ask yourself. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't believe in smashing the patriarchy. I don't think the patriarchy will be smashed. It will melt. It will melt slowly. It's melting as we are in this room right now. And as long as we're respectful of that, I think there's resistance. Okay, yeah, shall I? Okay, so the book has Shahrukh on the title, which means that we had to tell his team that, this book is coming out. I mean, India doesn't have personality rights statutes in the law, but it's courtesy and you have to. And so we did, and that was fine. And then we never heard from anyone ever. And then I had a Times of India interview actually the day this whole Lata Mangeshkar fiasco, with people just tweeting terrible things. And it's just so terrible the way people engage with his icon nowadays in some spaces. And I got a message then from his manager saying, what's the title? So for all my hubris that, oh, this book is out, it's bestseller, it's doing well, she had no idea. And then I told her this is the title, and she said, okay. And then for the life of her, she couldn't understand what is Abhijit Banerjee doing along with Sir. She literally, she said, oh, can you tell me? So we actually went through this thing where I tried to explain to her that, she's like, but Sir hai and economics bhi hai, ye kaise ho gaya? Like, how is this possible? So it was a very complex, weird conversation. Inshallah, it's definitely with his team. Inshallah, we'll reach him. And then I will report back soon. But it's in Mannat, and I'm headed to Bombay tomorrow.
Now that we know the book is in Mannat, okay, we thought we'd introduce a little bit of levity and hardcore Shahrukh content.
I hope the book is in Mannat, although now that she knows the title, and I know now that we know she's there. But yes, now levity is all yours, David.
Levity or hardcore seriousness. But we now enter that part of this event, and you can see those 3 books there. They are meant for 3 lucky people in the audience. They've all been signed by Shrayana. Okay. So Shrayana, what you have to do is, Aditya has with with a lot of help from our department. There's been a lot of interest in this matter. There are 3 questions which may or may not have something to do with Shah Rukh Khan. You're not allowed to participate, but what you have to do is, we'll do it the short way, okay? The question, Aditya is going to ask the question. If you know the answer, raise your hand, and Shrayana is going to have the impossible task of picking one person. Yeah, okay, yeah. So over to Aditya, and if the questions are very, very difficult, you can blame him. And
yeah, just please don't shout out the answers. Raise your hand. We'll call on you so we know who to give the book to. Can we go to the first question? And if you're, yeah, you just have to connect all of these to SRK. This is, yeah. Could you? Oh, no, no. Okay, yeah, let's not. Sorry. In hindsight, it's not very straightforward, but if you want to take a gander, raise your hands and we'll see. To the best of my knowledge, this list is exhaustive. This list of things. Feel free to guess. No, it's not. No. Yeah. No, I think everybody's on the wrong track. Yeah. Nope. I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint. It's something related to his feud with Amir Khan. Yeah. Yeah, so you get it. These are all of his dogs. They're called Juicy, Hulk, Chewbacca, and Kai. Those are his dogs' names. Right. So we'll move to the second question. Second question is very dry. What is his lucky number? Yep, that's it. That's his lucky number. You want to come up? Yeah, so the correct answer is 555, which is what she said. Yeah. Right. So the third question is just identify the film from the minimalist poster.
That is Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na.
I'd say in the true tradition of Bollywood, if you see some nepotism, ignore it.
Yeah. So we're having one more question. Can we go to the backup question 4? Yeah. Who played the husband of Shah Rukh Khan's love interest in his debut film? There are multiple parts to work out here. But if you can get it, you get a signed copy. The person blue? Yeah. No. Nope. No, it's not Sunil Shetty. Yep. You want to come up and get the book? It's Rishi Kapoor.
I will. Fine. Hi, Shruti. Wait, hang on. That's very mean. Please correct me. Shruti with H in your name?